Native American children are now being targeted. Why would anyone do that? Well, there's a reason why. Forcibly transferring children from one group to another is an international legal definition of genocide, ladies and gentlemen, and it's starting to happen right now in front of our noses, and we're not supposed to find out about this, but I'll be sharing the details on who's doing this and why. Taking children has been one strategy for terrorizing Native families for centuries. From the mass removal of Native children from their communities into boarding schools to their widespread adoption and fostering out to mostly white families, it's what led to the passage of the Indian Child Welfare Act, ICWA of 1978, the touchstone legislation that aimed to reverse more than a century of state-sponsored family separation. Welcome to The Naked Truth on the USA Podcast channel, the program where I share the important notes of the day from newspapers, magazines, social network, radio, and television in the United States from my Hispanic point of view that impacts all Americans, not just some. I'm Juan Andres, also known as Senor USA. Attacking non-combatants, especially children, to enable the conquest of land by destroying the family and therefore indigenous nations isn't unique. It goes as far back as the Pilgrims. Yet the spirit of George Armstrong Custer still haunts the fate of Native children even today. And when I get into details of what's happening right under our noses, you're going to say, oh my goodness, nothing's really changed. General Custer of the 7th Cavalry was infamous during the 19th century Indian Wars for riding into an enemy camp, holding Native women, children, and elders hostage at gunpoint, and forcing the tribe to surrender. Nowadays, the fight has shifted from the battlefield to the courtroom, and Cherokee journalist Rebecca Nagle shows how corporate lawyers and right-wing think tanks like the Cato Institute have teamed up with non-Native people and families to not only dismantle the entire legal structure, protect their Native rights, and so far they've had important victories. Last April, an appeals court upheld parts of a federal district court decision in a case called Bracken versus Haaland that found parts of the Indian Child Welfare Act of 1978 unconstitutional, if you could believe that. The non-Indian plaintiffs contended that federal protections to keep Native children with Native families constitute illegal racial discrimination and that the Indian Child Welfare Act federal standards commandeer states, courts, and agencies for a federal agenda. But plainly, the mostly white families wanting to foster and adopt Native children are claiming reverse racism and arguing that federal overreach is trampling state rights, two coded words frequently associated with dismantling anti-racist policies. According to this upside-down logic, the Indian Child Welfare Act's monumental legislation consciously designed to undo genocide and racist policies is racist because it prevents mostly non-Indians from adopting Native children. The thinking is as old as the civilizing mission of colonialism, saving brown children from their brown parents. Court records show that 2 of the 3 non-Indian families in Bracken have successfully fostered or adopted Native children despite the Indian Child Welfare Act protections and with tribes agreeing to the adoption, but they still claim discrimination. You ask yourself, why is that? They got what they wanted. Why are they claiming discrimination if they got what they wanted? Well, a mountain of evidence suggests that Native families, particularly poor ones, are the real victims. In 2 studies from 1969 to 1974, the Association on American Indian Affairs found that 25 to 35% of all Native children had been separated from their families and placed in foster homes or adoptive homes or institutions. 90% were placed in non-Indian homes. The Indian Child Welfare Act aimed to reverse this trend. Today, Native children are 4 times more likely to be removed from their families than white children are from theirs. And according to a 2020 study, in many states, Native family separation has surpassed rates prior to the Indian Child Welfare Act. This is mostly due to states ignoring and flouting Indian Child Welfare Act requirements. They're Indians. What do they know? They won't even figure it out. Let's take advantage of this. A common cause for removal is neglect, a form of abuse and a highly skewed claim, especially when the Native families most targeted are poor. Failure to pay the rent, for example, can result in eviction and homelessness and the placement of a child in foster care because of unstable living conditions. Some states' statutes may provide up to several thousands of dollars a child per month to foster parents, depending on the number of children in their care and the child's special needs. It's big business, folks. It's a lot of money. A lot of money. Taking the child away from the poor people is an easy way to have a great business. Why doesn't that money go towards keeping the families together? If they can't make the rent and they're missing $250 or $300 to make ends meet, it certainly is a lot cheaper than paying the foster family thousands of dollars for the child. And the Indian family may only need it a few times a year when they're in a bind. Huh? Why? And there's a dark side of foster care. Much like the boarding school system which preceded it, foster care is rife with stories of forced assimilation into dominant white culture, to say nothing of the lifelong trauma of being torn from one's family and nation during the formative years of being a child. Shame on us. So why are corporate law firms like Gibson Dunn, which has represented Walmart, Amazon, Chevron, and Shell, and is a former employer of the right-wing Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton, showing up at custody battles to square off with poor Native families that can't make the rent? Are they really interested in welfare? Are they really interested in helping Native children? Powerful conservative forces want to bring Bracken and Halen to the Supreme Court, not just to overturn the Indian Child Welfare Act, but to gut the Native tribes' federal protections and rights, like their counterparts, the anti-critical race crusaders of the Indian Child Welfare Act advocates use the language of equality to target Native nations. The collective tyranny of the tribe, the thinking goes, violates the rights of the individual. The rich individual. Kill the Indian, save the man. The Indian is a tribal consciousness. The collective rights of a nation and its sovereignty must be weakened or destroyed to gain access to its land and resources. These were Indians that, when the Pilgrims came and the colonies were formed and we started taking over their land and giving them treaties, and then finding out that we wanted to get that land, and so we broke the treaties and pushed them further west and further west until we gave them lands that we knew we didn't want, because back then we were a farming nation and you couldn't farm in those lands. But nowadays, folks, we're not a farming nation anymore. The big bucks are coming from resources, metals, gold, gas, petroleum. Oh, there's a lot of stuff under those lands that were thought were worthless. How do we find a new way to bamboozle these Indians out of that land and get access to the money? They certainly don't have a right to it. Let them stay poor. That's the thinking. It's shameful. Without the tribe, there is no Indian. When there's no Indian, there's no one to claim the land. White congressmen from western states used the same reasoning to terminate tribes in the 1950s, making the argument that the collective rights of tribes shouldn't trump individual rights of U.S. citizens. The results were catastrophic. The legal abolition of dozens of tribes led to the privatization of their lands for the benefit of white settlers and businesses. Native journalists like Rebecca Nagel reveal how nefarious corporate interests are trying to undermine that project by attacking the most precious amongst us, our children. Shame on us. God, we have a nasty way of dealing, especially with Native Americans. We've abused them and African Americans to the hilt, and we still want more. Shame on us. I'm Juan Andres, also known as Senor USA on The Naked Truth. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.